So I got asked to talk about puberty. So puberty is, again, it's a really big issue. And I'm not sure exactly, specifically what you want to know about puberty. Um, Obviously everybody goes through puberty, and I think that it's really important that you're aware of the difference between someone's chronological age and their developmental age. I did some consultancy for Limpsfield Grange School, which is a specialist girls' school, and they have a very high proportion of students who are autistic. And they started grouping people by development level rather than by year group for their relationship and sex education programme. And I think that's really worked for them, because somebody who's in year 11 actually might need the information that year 7 are getting. Equally, somebody in year 7 might need the information that typically would be delivered to year 11. So by grouping people by development level, it meant that people were getting the information that they needed at the time when they needed it. So I think that's really important. I think also, and it's happening now, but when I was at school, there was still Section 28 of the Education Act, so people couldn't do anything that might be considered promoting homosexuality, and so it meant that there wasn't any reflection of the LGBTQIA plus community within the resources that were provided, but also in the relationship and sex education curriculum there wasn't any representation of disabled people, like openly disabled people. Now obviously not all disabilities are visible, there are many hidden disabilities, but I think it is really important that we grow up in a world where we are seeing disabled people that's just every day, not because we're learning about disability today, but just because there's a lot of disabled people. I think also providing resources that are that are maybe actually made by people just a few years older than 18, so that they're refreshed every few years, because it's got to be current. And also it may well be a bit geographical in terms of language and so the words that are used to describe things within sort of teen culture, I guess, particularly when people start when they start to have sexual relationships, or start to go out drinking, or start to go out clubbing, and then they're exposed to drink and drugs, and so knowing the language gives you power. Personally, I don't think it works to just tell people just say no to everything, as well. I don't think people always do. I think you need to give people knowledge so that they can make informed choices. And I think particularly around sex education, that often autistic people are infantilized, so they're treated like children and not thought that they're going to grow up. But when they get to 16, if they have capacity, then they're the age of consent. So long as they have capacity, they are allowed to make that choice. And it's not for anybody else to tell that person what choices they should be making. If they have capacity, they get to choose. So it's about giving people the knowledge to be able to make their own choices, and to be able to think about it in a informed way. And I think that's really important. And I think so often people, they don't want to think about people with disabilities having sex. Maybe some of it is that they think it's gross, or they just don't think it's appropriate. Or sorry, that was somebody exiting their door there, sorry about that. People don't want to think about it, but I think we do need to think about it, and we do need to talk about it, because I think that if we don't give people information, then potentially that creates safeguarding risks, because that person is not able to make choices, not able to understand information that's being communicated, because we've got to make sure that resources are provided with the lingo that's actually being used in everyday culture for that generation, so that people can understand the information. With regards to like physical changes, I think sometimes, particularly for autistic people, that they're highly anxious and like to be in control, that can be really overwhelming, having a body change. So I think it's like knowing, like, not just that, your body's going to change, but like trying to understand what that might feel like. But also that puberty is, in a way, quite a slow process, that it happens over a number of years, and different people go at different rates. I didn't really finish puberty probably until I was about 21, 22. So it's really, I think, important that you make people aware this is a slow process. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and have breasts. It is a gradual thing. And so you are going to be going through this change, and along the way there will be different problems that will come up, and you will learn to overcome them. And some of those problems will kind of be things that will stick with you for a long time, like periods, for example. Periods are a thing that you don't have when you go through puberty, and then most people who have ovaries, fallopian tubes, and a womb and a vagina, most people then have periods. I think that's really important that we don't associate periods with womanhood, because people start periods when they're 8 sometimes. They're not a woman. People don't have periods when they're pregnant usually. They're still a woman, if that's how they identify. When people go through the menopause, they don't stop being a woman just because their periods are stopped. But also other gender identities have periods, because really what makes a period possible is having a vagina, a womb, fallopian tubes and ovaries. So really, when we talk about people who have periods, it isn't about being a woman or being a girl. It's really just if you have a womb, fallopian tubes, ovaries and a vagina. That's what makes having a period possible. So I think really being clear about that is important. And then there are problems that happen mostly when you're a teenager and then they go away, like spots, for example. Sure, we all get the odd spot here and there, but when you're a teenager you get loads of them, and you have to have special face washes and all of that stuff. And so I think that is really important to explain that this is not a thing. Spots don't, you're not going to be plagued by them for the rest of your life. You don't have to worry. So I think being clear about that is important. I think also knowing the trajectory, but knowing that if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, from an identity perspective, that it is possible to be referred to a gender clinic, and a lot of autistic people are under gender clinics. And having when you're a young person, being under a gender clinic does not necessarily mean that you are going to transition. It might be that you want to take puberty blockers to put puberty on pause while you figure out what your identity is. And then it just gives you a bit more time. So I think that's important. I think also as professionals, being very aware of the gender spectrum is really important. So often people talk about sex and gender as if it's the same thing. They're two different things. So biological sex is when you're born and they say it's a girl or it's a boy, that's your biological sex. Sometimes people are intersex, meaning that they have both male and female reproductive organs, and sometimes you can see that when a baby is born, but quite often it might be that they have external genitals that belong normally to one sex, and then internal organs that belong to another sex normally. I say normally, it's not, there's a lot of intersex people, but typically, in terms of what people would expect. So you might not find out that you're intersex until much later on, because it might not be obvious. If you've got a penis, it wouldn't necessarily be obvious that you also have a womb. So people that have a mix of male and female biological sex organs or genitals, that is described as intersex. Your gender is different. So your gender is how you see yourself, how society treats you. And so I'm cisgendered, which means that my biological sex, so the sex I was assigned at birth, when I was born, they said, oh yeah, it's a girl, that matches my gender identity. I am a woman, and I identify as female. But not everybody's biological sex and gender match up. Now, when people think about that, they often think about people who are trans, and that is definitely true. However, there are other gender identities like non-binary, for example, and genderqueer. So it's really important to be aware of, the whole gender spectrum, because autistic people may well identify across that gender spectrum, making sure that information is available to them, to kind of understand that information. I think also another thing to think about is when we talk about girls and women, it was really helpful 10-15 years ago when we were making a distinction between males and females on the autistic spectrum. However, I don't think we need to be using that gendered language anymore. I think that really now we need to be talking about presentation types. So I have quite a masculine presentation type for being autistic, and I'm also, quite masculine in the way I present myself as a woman. Those two things are separate, but just to say that the whole the idea that somebody can present in a masculine way and somebody can present in a feminine way, that exists already, like in society. But I think we should be using even that sounds a bit gendered, and hopefully in another 10 years we might have better language to describe it. But for now, I think we should maybe be moving more towards saying like a masculine presentation of autism and a feminine presentation of autism, because the problem we have at the moment is, more women and girls are getting diagnosed. There is still, there's still more work to be done with that, but I think that there are people who identify as male who might have a feminine presentation of autism be unable to get a diagnosis because people are like, well, that's not what autism looks like in men, you're really good at masking, for example. So I think it's very important that we are aware of any kind of gender bias that we might be putting in place.